morning and welcome to Friday Live here on Nebraska Public Media. We're broadcasting this week from our studios in Lincoln. Portions of today's show are pre-recorded. I'm Genevieve Randall. An artist from Hastings will be here this morning. Two of Nebraska's foremost printmakers in one conversation. A book event coming up shines a light on Virginia Faulkner and her writings. A space in downtown Lincoln gives aspiring musicians opportunities to flourish. And Lincoln welcomes back the amazing pianist Gabriela Montero.
So even though my concerts are not political, because I think there is a time and a space for everything, what I want is for people to care and for people to listen and for people to understand their history.
Thanks for listening to Friday Live on Nebraska Public Media. Support for programming comes from The Ross. Opening tonight is the film No Other Choice, a black comedy where an unemployed man sets out to secure a new job by eliminating his competition. Continuing is The Choral, starring Ralph Fiennes as an uncompromising chorus master, helping a depleted Yorkshire choir during World War I. TheRoss.org. Gabriela Montero began playing piano when she was 4 and made her concerto debut at age 8 in her hometown of Caracas. Her playing has been described as possessing, quote, crackling rhythmic brio, subtle shadings, steely power, soulful lyricism, and unsentimental expressivity, unquote. Now she is bringing her playing back to the Lead Center for Performing Arts in Lincoln on January 26th, where she will be playing pieces by Stravinsky, Rachmaninoff, and Prokofiev, along with an improvised whole new score to a Charlie Chaplin film called The Immigrant. Gabriela joins me here today. Gabriela, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. I will have to correct you, though, because I actually started playing the piano when I was 8 months old. And I was playing all these melodies that my mother would sing to me to put me to sleep by the time I was a year and a half. So when I began lessons, I was 4. But by that time, I was already, doing my thing at the piano. It was my favorite toy.
I can imagine your teacher sees this 4-year-old show up and you're already playing all these melodies and thinks, where did you learn these?
Yeah, it was quite a story, the whole thing, I have to say. But there was very early beginnings, yeah.
I'd love to dive into this repertoire that you picked with Stravinsky, Rachmaninoff, and Prokofiev. I sense there is a theme. Would you mind explaining what the theme is and why you chose this?
Of course. So the program is really called Westward, and it's 3 composers, who Russians, Prokofiev, Rachmaninoff, Stravinsky, who either emigrated to the West or spent time in the West and had some connection to film. And basically, I devised this program because I wanted to be able to speak about the 8 million Venezuelans that have fled Venezuela. So it's very much about immigration. But from my experience as a Venezuelan, so these 3 composers, their new lives, let's say, in the West, and then it ties to film music and somehow their influence on film music or involvement in film music with Charlie Chaplin's film, which is a little jewel of 22 minutes, The Immigrant. So it's a link between film music and, of course, classical composers, but also the journey of the immigrant and the difficulties, joys, expectations, disappointments of the immigrant. And they're beautifully portrayed by Charlie Chaplin in this little film, which I absolutely improvise every note to. And I have no idea what I will do until I'm sitting there and I watch the film.
You've been doing this concert, though, so it's brand new each time that you improvise to The Immigrant?
Completely new. I never watch it or listen to the recording or anything like that. It's just it just kind of wipes itself off, off my mind, and that's it. And I can't repeat it, and it's completely different. Yeah.
The film, the Charlie Chaplin film, The Immigrant, came out in 1917. I'm kind of curious to know from your perspective, the things that he presents in The Immigrant and the idea of the immigrant, what's different? What's the same?
Well, I think when it's forced immigration because it's war or it's a crisis, of course there's a different there's a whole different experience of that, of leaving home and being forced to leave home. I think that remains the same. When you leave your country because your expectation is to have a better life, but you know that you can still return to your home country and actually have the opportunity to build on that too. It's a very different feeling than having to flee and being in exile. Now, I think it's basically a lot of things haven't changed. The sadness of not being home, the uncertainty of what is to come, and finding your own place that is not yours, that is not your culture, your language, and more than anything, the longing of being connected to where you're from. And that just never changes, never leaves you.
Last time that I heard you play here in Nebraska at the Lead Center, you improvised on a song that any Nebraskan knows if they have been to a football game here in Nebraska, which is There Is No Place Like Nebraska. Now, that very much encapsulates a little bit of what it feels like to call Nebraska home, along with our state song, Beautiful Nebraska. As you're speaking, what for you is the meaning of home?
That's a good question. I've often wondered, is it a place? Is it the dirt, the soil, the nature? What is it? It's, being Venezuelan is a very specific thing, because when you go out there into the world and you meet so many Venezuelans like I have, thousands, and each one with a very, very sad story of exile and loss because of what's happened to Venezuela, you understand that the Venezuelan culture is something that's just, I don't know, there's something very, very ingrained, very deep, very special about who we are, where we come from, and more than anything, also recognizing the potential of what we could be. So what is home? For me, home is being able to live with those qualities, and I don't know, the humor, the warmth of Venezuelans. And it's a very specific, is it a place? I'm not sure if it's a place as much as it is a being. There's a difference. Yeah, a way of being.
I was going to ask you something about improvisation and what it is about it that appeals to you, but I can't help but wonder if improvisation connects to this experience that you're talking about.
Well, for me, improvisation has always been, is what I call my musical playground. It just surfaces, it's always there. I'm always connected to that inner child to say there are no limitations. There's no thought, actually. It's just kind of a magical outpouring of experience, of imagination, of risk-taking, of playing around. So is it linked to, I think it's very much linked to who I am and how I feel the world. And I can be a playful person. I have a sense of humor. I don't know, maybe it kind of reflects a little bit all of that, and it's just a metaphor and sound of what I have inside. But it's always been very, very, very intimate as well, very personal, my improvisation.
Well, not to just belabor all of the personal, but there is this current political climate that we are all dealing with. Everything is in the news right now.
Yeah.
And I noticed there was an interview you did. This is like 8 years ago, Gabriela.
Wow.
Somebody asked you, where would you like to be in 10 years' time? And your answer at the time was, in a free and democratic Venezuela. That's my greatest wish, but sooner I hope.
Yeah. Wow. 8 years ago.
How does it feel to hear that now?
It just makes me incredibly sad. It really does. But at the same time, I can tell you from being very much connected to this process and having been in this fight for 16 years now for my country, we are closer than ever to the possibility of having a free and democratic Venezuela. And it very much has to do with the vision and the leadership and the courage and self-sacrifice of Maria Corina Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize last year in 2025, and for whom I had the great, great honor of actually performing at her ceremony. She is a woman who is not only brilliant, but has given up her life for the quest, that we all have been hoping for, the freedom of Venezuela. And, what's happening now, it can be confusing, it can be many, many things, but I can tell you that we are closer than ever to that final chapter.
To bring it back to your performance at the Lead Center, if there are folks in the audience who, let's be honest, there are some people who are going to the arts and to music for escape, but they don't want to think about the news of the day, or maybe, like myself growing up, didn't even have that much education about Venezuela. What would you want folks in the audience to come away with after your concert? Is it part of the importance of doing these concerts to you to know a little bit about the struggle of folks in Venezuela, or is it enough to simply come for the music?
I think you can't disconnect both things. I think an artist is also a reflection of, we are a reflection of who we are in society and what we are living. And I am just the sum of the experiences that I've had as a human being. And unfortunately, this experience of being Venezuelan has brought all of this pain and all of this, activism, that to my life, which I never expected to be involved with. But when you care about something, you do something. You don't look the other way. And that's what happened to me. So even though my concerts are not political, because I think there is a time and a space for everything, what I want is for people to care and for people to listen and for people to understand their history and also be aware that the way that our story has been told and our history has been told and continues to be told is very often in the wrong way. So I'm hoping myself to be able to clarify some things, with my interviews, but also more than anything, to bring people to feel and understand what we feel as Venezuelans and what it feels like to lose everything. And that's in the music as well. It's in Rachmaninoff's music. It's also in Prokofiev, Stravinsky, and Shostakovich. It is part of the human heritage, unfortunately, through history. And it's very often portrayed through music and through sound.
Lots to behold in all of this music of Stravinsky, of Rachmaninoff, and Prokofiev, and some absolutely original music from our guest here, Gabriela Montero, as she improvises a whole new score for a Charlie Chaplin film called The Immigrant. All of that is on her performance coming up at the Lead Center for Performing Arts, which is Monday evening, January 26th at 7:30 p.m. Gabriela, such a pleasure to talk to you, and welcome back to Nebraska for this second concert.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to Monday and returning to Nebraska.
And for those of you listening, to link to more information, head to the Friday Live page. Find more information about Gabby's concert at nebraskapublicmedia.org/Friday Live. Glad you're with us here on Friday Live on Nebraska Public Media. Currently showing at Lincoln's Constellation Studios are the painted book covers of Turner McGee and the bound books containing painted pages by Ward Shoemaker, both who are connected to the Cornhusker State. The exhibition is called Books Bound, Unbound, and will be available for viewing at Constellation Studios in Lincoln until February 28th. Turner McGee is a professor at Hastings College, where he primarily teaches printmaking, drawing, and art history. And today I'm joined by both Turner as well as the director of Constellation Studios and printmaker herself and artist, Karen Kuntz. Hello and good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Thanks for being here today. So, Turner, your painted book covers, I feel like this really fits within the focus of Constellation Studios so well. What is the goal behind painting these book covers, and how do you achieve it?
I've never been primarily a painter, so this is a little bit of a new thing. But, of course, through all the years, Karen Kuntz has been inspiration to me with her handmade books and so forth. But she's the one who gave the show its title, Bound, Unbound. I think it's really a great title considering the juxtaposition of my work with Ward's. But it does have a purpose behind it besides just simply wanting to experiment in painting. I have for years been terribly upset by the war on books. And you may have noticed that so many of the libraries have begun to throw their books away. And I think this is going to come someday to be seen as one of the biggest mistakes that has been committed in our culture. Well, the war on books came to Hastings College, and one entire floor of the library was emptied out of books. And they were just simply gutting the paper out of them and throwing that in the recycling dumpster. And the covers were going in the trash dumpster. And a lot of those were books that I ordered, over 42 years of being there. Yeah. And it was just giving me such pain. They would give me any book I wanted that was going out. And I developed a small career in developing in delivering those to people who would want them. So, I took all the books on Newton over to the physics department. Some of them were quite beautiful. And I don't like to be unhappy, but that whole project was making me very unhappy. And I found myself thinking, what can be done with this or about this? And so I got the idea that if you take a book cover and prepare the spine very carefully and fold it back, it's as good as any canvas that you can buy in an art store. They're often made of linen or buckram, and each one is a different color. Sometimes they have interesting things on the cover, some kind of an imprint or a little picture or something like that. And so I started taking the books and recycling them into paintings. And I have a whole new career as an artist now because I'm painting every day. And it's unique in my career also because normally from year to year to year you can see steady development and progression in my work. Each picture is related to the one that came before it somehow. In this case, I just sit down every morning and try to improvise something right on the spot. And I've got a different color, a different shape of cover. Sometimes I have a little image that I can riff on. And so it's very liberating.
There's a little bit of that chance in there. You're making me think of chance music where, some composer will tell you to turn on a radio for a few seconds and turn it off again. You don't know what you're going to get. So there's some element of surprise or serendipity in the whole process. Well, Karen, how did this exhibition form in the first place? What was the initial seed and why?
Well, of course, I've known Turner for many years and know of his directions of printmaking and his imagery, but he mentioned this casually just a couple months ago, and I thought, what an interesting idea. And I wondered what he would have done with those book covers and how many he's been making. And pairing it with another artist who does books, I thought that could be a really good focus. And Turner sent a box and said, use them however you wish. And that led to the idea of the exhibition where they interrelate. There's kind of a flow. I thought there were interrelationships between some of the abstractions and even some landscapes. And then figures appeared too. But it's done in his style. I think the abstraction looks like little microbes and stone surfaces, overall patterns. So that has a real interesting continuity. but they look like books.
Yeah.
And the residue of books, the resonance of a book. That's what I find so interesting, to peek through and you can see the fabric underneath. And we know that fabric. We know how that feels.
I love that you chose the word resonance there, the resonance of a book.
Yeah.
Can I poke you and ask you to define what that is? The resonance of a book?
Well, it's something that we know in our hands, because we've all sat with a book and read in bed and know that feeling, and sit and have our favorite books, and some we can't throw away or destroy. Maybe I'll never read it again, but Independent People is one of my favorites, that if I find a used copy somewhere, I buy it.
Tell me a little bit about Ward and Ward Shoemaker and what he's like, where he's from, his background in art.
Well, Ward is a Nebraskan, but he has a great life story that says he won a prize in high school, and it was censored by the I don't know if it was the organizer of the show or the governor, and his work was coerced to be taken out of the show, and he agreed to do that, but they gave him a little extra prize money, and with that, he must have thought, I'm leaving, and he went to San Francisco. So he's lived there all these years and told this story. I met him in San Francisco, and that was his connection. Maybe it's a good story about the limitations of Nebraska, but it's also about an artist needing to fly and going somewhere else. And some of us go somewhere else, but then we come back to Nebraska and we work within the state to help broaden perspectives. But his work is really text-based, and he crafts stencils that he cuts from paper and then uses that to paint through onto these book pages. So they're rather messy, and the stencil leaks, and there's kind of drips of paint around. It's very painterly and drawing-like. But this use of the text that builds and goes throughout. One of the books actually is the text of the hymn, A Mighty Fortress is Our God. So to read that text slowly, crafted through these stencil works, and you see the range of message in this song, a hymn, that I hadn't ever really realized. So it makes you read very closely, and certainly that's what he's doing, is analyzing how words are used and documenting it through these texts. So often he's even using phrases from our political figures.
I wanted to pull something also, speaking of words, from the online description here. I don't know if you wrote this, Karen, or if...
Might be his bio from his website.
This says, the artist's common issue is to embed the book format and material references with free associations and to spark our deep reading. Can you unpack that one a little bit for me, how we see this in the collection?
Well, Ward's books are oversized, and so there's a work at moving the pages. And as you go through and you sense the work that he's doing to make this text not always legible. So then you have to really read through it and interpret and spend time. And that enables this deep experience, which I think is what we're all after for our art and for our reading experiences, too. I'm always looking for the one phrase that makes me want to dog-ear a page. And a librarian might not like that, but that's how I can go back and find something meaningful.
Well, then that librarian will just pull those pages out, Karen, and then Turner will paint the cover, it turns out. It's also a parallel, it's not lost on me, that Ward's work was censored all those years ago, and then here the library is throwing out books, Turner, and you're taking which is a form of censorship, right? And you're taking the covers and painting them. What's planned for the future with this? Are you going to continue painting book covers, Turner?
I'll keep doing it as long as I'm productive.
Okay. Sounds good.
A lot of times I feel like I come to the end of a string, It's time to do something else. But this has been a lot of fun. I've been doing it for 3 years or so now. I've got hundreds of them.
Wow.
Well,
More things to
I
keep
think
an eye
there's
out
about
for.
35 at the exhibition.
Okay. So we're scratching the surface here. Well, you have an opportunity to see this body of work, Books Bound Unbound. And that is Turner McGee's work as well as Word Shoemaker's work at Constellation Studios in Lincoln. That's up now until February 28th. And for more on this event or any of the other events you hear about today across the state, be sure to visit the Friday Live page. That's at nebraskapublicmedia.org. Karen, as always, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And Turner, as always, great to talk with you. Thanks for sharing.
It's an honor. Thank you.
Still to come on this week's show, Greg Kosmiski joins us again with some more of his poetry and writing, as well as a chat with author Brad Bigelow about his newest book, Virginia Faulkner, A Life in Two Acts. This is Friday Live on Nebraska Public Media. The writer Geraldine Brooks lost her husband, journalist and author Tony Horowitz suddenly. With no room at the time to truly grieve, Brooks delayed that important act. Her book, Memorial Day, is her journey towards healing. All About Books host Pat Leach says her book defies expectations.
I suspect that many readers expect a book about grief to be dense and difficult, and some of this book is dense and difficult. But the book's physical layout includes a lot of white space, which helps one digest those complicated thoughts. Barely 200 pages long, with blank space after each paragraph, it looks doable, even for the grieving reader.
Hear a complete review of Memorial Day by Geraldine Brooks online at nebraskapublicmedia.org/allaboutbooks. Support for programming comes from Cornerstone Bank, a family-owned bank providing custom investments, trust, and estate planning services since 1882 with 48 Nebraska locations. To learn more, cornerstoneconnect.com. Cornerstone Bank, building trust on a solid foundation.
Hi, this is Greg Kosmiski. Again, this is a poem called Saturday from a collection, Tables, Chairs, Wall, Window, about my mother's dementia. Saturday, the doctor said we could bring her home, so we did. And Saturday, she sat with us in her chair, voices swirling around her, and the bodies, all part of her creation, hers and Dad's, all of us there because of them. And Saturday later, we would talk about just that and what we all could do. Saturday, she lasted long enough to eat 2 bites of an Arby's sandwich, then demanded to return to the hospital, exhausted. And Saturday, our mother lay down, fully clothed in her hospital bed, as she has never done in her adult life, because she was too tired for anything else, for changing, not even to take off her nylon socks that were cutting off her circulation. And Saturday, her 2 living sons and one of her daughters laid her down onto the hospital bed, and she sank far, far down into the blankets and pillows, a mirage, a puff of cake flour. And Saturday, I saw my mother's face look back at me as if she would not see me again, her little head wrinkled and shrunken up as a dried rosebud. And Saturday, we kissed our mother back into sleep she needed more than she needed us. And Saturday, I looked at her, and she seemed almost to disappear. And Saturday, I remembered that smile on her face, just in case, how her thin arms reached around my neck. And Saturday, how her hands patted my back, hands thin as communion hosts, light as the touch of a small bird's wing. The next poem I'd like to read is poem called Deodorant from a collection from Pudding House Press called Greg Kosminski's Greatest Hits. Deodorant. Audrey comes down the stairs crying. This time it's antiperspirant in the left eye. She can't believe how stupid she is. We put her under the tap, but the chemicals she wears to hide the fact she's actually human, made of grease, sweat, oils, dirt, will not flush out so easily. These ones are guaranteed, I think, for 14 hours to keep from letting anyone see that inside this skin she lives in like an advertisement for 100 different products is only a little girl, my 14-year-old daughter, who can't understand how she could do this feat. The amazing Audrey will now place antiperspirant directly into her open eye. Any more than she is able to understand, she says, how that morning last winter it came to pass that I must rescue her like a person in space tangled in her life support system from her hot comb by cutting away her hair, her golden hair, like tiny strands of rope furiously knotted to the core of absurdity, so that when each one eventually was scissored in two, she was able to drift back to me, happy again, embarrassed and free. We sluice her eye, but the antiperspirant is stronger than the universal solvent, so we settle finally upon Visine. We sit together on the steps, she in her golden, almost a woman's body, I in my old man fat, and I see the two lines that run across her forehead, like the ones in mine from laughing and crying. See how much even in our faces we are tied together, and put the drops into that fragile place from where she looks out at me, where light comes into her body. And I'd like to read a poem from The Patron Saint of Lost and Found, which was published by Lone Tree Press. Sweeping out the garage. There must be a thin crack under the door, just big enough the leaves slip through, like letters into a mail slot. And they bring the news to me of the weather, of the fall, of what lives and dies and goes on. If I were to be locked up in the garage, prisoner of some madman or some mad desire, I would know the seasons and chalk the time off on the wall with a bit of coal or rock. After the leaves comes the snow, the tendrils grow into the darkness, the climbing vines, then hot dust, dry, mixed with spells of wet, then again dry leaves. But I'm not locked in here and can open the door, so I have no need of that accounting. It is only a day in fall and only cleaning, only the stack of leaves like irregularly shaped epistles of loss, about how at the end of all things green turn to dust. I sweep up the leaves and their sad stories, put them on the flower bed for mulch. Come back and sweep up all the poems the dust tried to tell me.
Greg Kosminski read Saturday, Deodorant, and Sweeping Out the Garage. Kosminski is a poet and retired social worker who lives in Omaha, Nebraska. He founded the Backwaters Press in 1997, which he now serves as editor emeritus.
Coming up, Francie and Finch in Lincoln is hosting the writer and editor Brad Bigelow. That's tomorrow, January 24th, 4:30 p.m., for a discussion about his new book, Virginia Faulkner, A Life in Two Acts. Published by University of Nebraska Press, he traces the remarkable and complicated life of Nebraska-born writer Virginia Faulkner, whose career spanned journalism, novels, Hollywood, and ultimately a lasting influence on American literature through her editorial work and advocacy for Willa Cather. Brad Bigelow is an author and longtime champion of overlooked books, coming to our studio here all the way from Montana, I understand today. Brad, welcome, and thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
You didn't drive in straight this morning?
No, I
okay,
flew
good.
it.
Okay, good. Well, this book is called A Life in Two Acts. What do you see as the two acts in Virginia Faulkner's life?
Well, Virginia Faulkner, who was born and raised in Lincoln, she was really at the heart of power in Lincoln, if you were. Her family founded the Woodman Insurance Company, which is a surety today. So if anybody knows the state capitol, right across the street, you have the former headquarters of the Woodman with the Helping Hand sculpture. So her family was right at the center of the growth of power and economics in Lincoln and Nebraska, but she couldn't wait to get out of it. She thought it was just a hick town and a hick state, and she wanted to get to New York and get to become a writer and be in the center of the smart set, as it was known in the 20s and 30s. And she did that. She worked her way. She started out by working for the Washington Post, writing kind of funny pieces. She sold a novel, moved to New York, did very well, got right into it. She was partying with people like Tallulah Bankhead, and did very well selling magazine fiction. She went to MGM and wrote for the movies. And her life went along, and she was making good money, and she was considered really often referred to as another Dorothy Parker. But she kind of hit a midlife crisis in the late 40s, partly due to mental health, but also to an artistic crisis where she reevaluated what she was doing. And she frankly decided that what she was doing as a writer wasn't of the artistic merit that she felt that was necessary to be worthy. She came back to Lincoln really as a pit stop on her way to what she didn't really know where she was going, and she ended up being offered a job of putting together an anthology about Nebraska called Roundup for the University of Nebraska Press. And in doing that work, I think she developed. First, she realized that this was work that she really felt was more important than anything she did as a writer. But also, she came to really respect her own state and the people here. And she particularly respected the faculty and the work that was going on for the University of Nebraska. And she began to realize that she had a platform with the press to rediscover and champion a forgotten Western literature, and in particular to start building up a body of work around Willa Cather as Nebraska's most prominent author. And kind of her agenda in that second act of her life was to build up both the press as a serious academic institution and to advance Willa Cather as not a regionalist. What she hated were all these adjectives that were applied to writers to sort of diminish their work. And Cather, of course, was smeared as a Midwest writer. She wrote about people on farms, and that wasn't as important as books set in New York or someplace else. And Virginia wanted to strip away the idea of Cather as a regionalist. And unfortunately, she also felt that other labels were limiting too, such as female and lesbian. And so, in hindsight, both Virginia and her partner, Bernice Sloat, have been accused of essentially suppressing the image of Cather as a lesbian.
Interesting stuff there.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny as you talk, I feel like 1920s, 30s, that idea of getting out of the hick town and going to the big city, it could be 2020s, you know.
Absolutely.
You still hear people say this. You also talked about Virginia Faulkner's struggles, depression, alcoholism. How did you go about writing and approaching these challenges in her life that are so personal?
That's really a great question, because one of the challenges for a biographer is where's the evidence, where's the documentary evidence, and I joke that I could be great in a court now presenting something based on entirely circumstantial evidence, because that whole period. So there was a period in the late 40s, early 50s where Virginia voluntarily entered a mental asylum and very likely underwent multiple rounds of electroconvulsive therapy, which was the de facto treatment in those days for manic depression. Now, I don't have her medical records. I don't know if they even exist. It was a private clinic that is no longer in business. But the evidence is clear. The doctors, I know the doctors who treated her, they all wrote about treating depression in that manner. And even afterwards, she had bouts of manic depression. The rest of her life, she dealt with mental illness as a challenge.
So how do you write about her? You also mentioned her relationship with Bernice Sloat. How do you approach shaping her as a character? What's the portrait that you create? How do you create balance? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, right. That's a great question, and I think every biographer deals with. For me, particularly because Virginia was an editor, and she was known for being a junkyard dog with a bone in terms of dealing. I mean, that's how she dealt with text. And many writers that I spoke to who had her as an editor said that she was ferocious and tenacious. And so as I was writing the book, I kept imagining her looking over my shoulder, saying, "No, that's wrong. That's wrong. You shouldn't do that." I think having some knowledge of mental illness, because my wife is a psychologist, that it became clear. Part of it is the context. So she lost her parents. By the time she was 17, she'd lost both her parents. And she early on had reports from people who knew her of Virginia's down. She's in a manic. Well, they didn't use the term manic, but and she admits herself that she, in various letters, that she dealt with it through alcoholism primarily. So it was clear that was sort of a background context, and when you know that, you can sort to fit the external events and data about somebody's life into a framework that sort of makes a coherent picture.
So if listeners want to check out some of Virginia Faulkner's writing, now that you've done this deep dive here, Brad, right, where do you think people should start? What are important things that they should know or read?
Well, to be honest, I would not be the first person to champion bringing Virginia's books back to print. They're very hard to get. And they've never been, none of her work has ever been reissued. I would say if you're looking for like a written equivalent of a 1930s screwball comedy, her stories are very much in that vein. She was published in places like the Saturday Evening Post and Collier's and Liberty, which were big magazines at the time. So that stuff is out there. It's mostly in archives, so it's not easy to get at. It's sort of lightweight, forgettable, fun stuff. And I think when she turned her back on writing, she turned her back completely. She never published anything after that. And I think that was her conclusion, that it was she never pushed for her own books to come back to print. And so, honestly, when I approached this book, I approached it more as an interesting human story than a writer's life. And that was sort of a breakthrough for me, because I can't champion her as a great Nebraska writer who needs to be revived. She's just a fascinating person, somebody who dealt with life challenges and came back in a way that I think is really inspiring.
If I can only give you 10 seconds, I do have to ask you one more question, Brad. Why are you a champion of the overlooked?
I think mainly I use the analogy of driving through the countryside. So if we were going to go today and drive to Denver, we'd get on I-80 and we'd blast along at 80 miles an hour. And if you think that Nebraska is what you see from I-80, you get a very fake view of and incorrect view of what Nebraska is. If you go on, say, US 385 or a Nebraska county road, you start to discover how varied the countryside is. And the same thing applies for literature. So we know the main names, and we know the ones that are going to be taught in high school, like The Great Gatsby and Of Mice and Men and things like that, Steinbeck, Fitzgerald, Hemingway. But there are lots of other places in the landscape of literature that are just as worthy of discovery, and that's what I'm interested in bringing out to people.
Author Brad Bigelow. He's telling us about his new book here this morning, Virginia Faulkner, A Life in Two Acts. And he will be in person at Francie and Finch tomorrow. That is at 4:30 p.m. for a discussion, doing a little reading with a Q&A about Faulkner's life. For more about this event and other events happening across the state, visit the Friday Live page at nebraskapublicmedia.org. Brad, thank you. Fascinating discussion.
Thank you.
Coming up, a space in Lincoln that focuses on growing the music scene in Lincoln. This week on the Friday Live Extra, we go back in time to medieval Europe. In the 11th century, architecture, sculpture, and music became part of a shrine to Sainte Foy, a saint who defied Roman authority and died for her faith.
And this is the tiredness of the singers and the fact that they have to, at certain moments, they start struggling, reaching these high notes. And the program that we selected that is different from the program at Stanford and therefore presents music that is also new to be performed and shared with audience, resurrected after the 1,000 years of its existence, is the music we hear the voice of Sainte Foy.
Learn more about a special musical event being held at UNO that has not been heard for nearly 1,000 years. Head to our website, nebraskapublicmedia.org/Friday Live. Support for programming comes from St. Paul United Methodist Church, based in the heart of downtown Lincoln. Worship services take place on Sundays at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. in person or online. All are loved and welcome here. Learn more at stpaulumc.org. The Music Box in downtown Lincoln is the brainchild of award-winning record producer and artist Philip Zock, who has produced 4 #1 singles, 2 more in the Billboard Top 10, released 10 studio albums, and toured in over 1,000 cities across 9 countries. Philip Zock joins me now to talk about this project, The Music Box. Philip, welcome.
It's so good to be here.
It's good to have you. We need to chat more often, honestly.
I know. I was thinking the same thing when I saw you behind the glass there.
Well, I'm glad you're here in the studio now with us.
Yeah, and I wanted to just respond to your intro there, just briefly.
Yeah.
The Music Box is the brainchild of a lot of people.
Okay, fair.
And there's a massive team and so many people that were involved in this thing to make it a reality. So I'm just honored to be part of the journey.
What do you describe your title then instead of brainchild?
Right now, I'm the executive director of the space, and so I'm in charge of members and what happens on site, making sure that the systems are happening, the equipment's working, and make sure that the community is engaged and there's tons of cool stuff that people have access to.
So let's tell listeners what it is. When was the original spark for this project?
It's been a very long time coming. So Downtown Lincoln Association, Todd Ogden, he's an amazing guy, he was holding these music district meetings. And the space came available, and the mayor gave it to us to see if we could do something with it. And so we came up with the concept of, what if musicians had what they needed to succeed? At least if they had access to the equipment and the expertise of the music industry, what could the music scene look like in Lincoln in 10 years? And why, when you think of a music city, do you think of Nashville, of LA, of Austin? You know, there's places that you immediately think of, even Lawrence, Kansas.
Yeah, so let's talk about that cost a little bit, because if you're a musician and you're in a band, what are you looking at if you want to record and produce an album? What are your barriers, in other words?
To having success in the music industry, there are an incredible number of hurdles and obstacles. And I was a musician for a long time, and there's a lot of hard work, and there's a lot of meet the right person at the right time. I talk to musicians who are about to quit or are drastically reducing the amount of hours they get to spend on music, and I want to encourage them to spend more time, remove some of the obstacles that are keeping them from doing it for a living. What if you could make money at it? What if you're not giving up your day job? What if it becomes your day job? And that vision is what Music Box is all about.
So as an example, if you want to create a press kit that you want to distribute, how does Music Box help make that happen for musicians?
We just stocked that space with the equipment of music. We put a recording studio. We also put rehearsal equipment there, monitors, a sound system, lights. And so anybody that has access to the space is going to access all of that equipment, and it's really great stuff. And so for three purposes: one, to record; two, to rehearse; and three, to showcase. And if an artist has the ability to, instead of come to my studio, which is like 6 blocks away, and you're spending a lot of money, to have the time to explore the music that you want to make, I find that critical to the success of an artist. You never want to be looking at the clock and being like, well, okay, that's good enough. You want to have time. What would somebody need for an electronic press kit? If somebody's going to book your band or you as an artist, they want to see you perform. They want to hear what you have to offer, and they want to see some press photos. They want to see that stuff. So what we've put on site is the equipment to give you access to that stuff.
So also, last week, you invited, I should say, your cousin, Philip Daniel, with Elskavan. And the show is interesting to me because a combination of music, there's visual elements. So I guess I'm thinking like, yes, a workshop, a place for musicians to learn, to grow their skills, but also a venue.
I would say a listening room. So our members have access to the space, whatever it is that they need. And I would say like 90% of our members are using the space just for recording. There's one guy who books it between midnight and 4 in the morning on Saturdays and Sunday mornings. I'm like, that's his time to create. I love that. And Philip, who is a member, Philip Daniel, excellent neoclassical piano player. He's using his membership he's probably going to be recording. He's doing rehearsal, and he did that pretty amazing show.
Well, what's ahead for MBX?
We want to develop the next generation of artists in Lincoln. We're doing an open casting call. We want to hear your music, and our board is going to pick the top 5, and then we are going to make a 4-song EP for those artists. We're going to shoot a live video, a photo shoot, and some music business. How do you monetize a song, etc. And then they own everything. We really just want to set people up to succeed. And then the MBX Academy. And this one is launching in the fall. The Academy is going to be the place where we are training the next generation of not just music makers, but people in and around the music industry.
Really good. Well, I've been talking here with Philip Zock, who is executive director at the Music Box, which is a great space for many things, it turns out, especially musicians. Philip, what a pleasure. We'll keep our eyes and ears open and watch for musicians coming out of the space.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be here. I can't wait to see and hear what Lincoln will be like in 5-10 years.
The Sheldon Museum of Art in Lincoln opens 3 new exhibitions tomorrow. One of these is From Sketch to Sculpture, Torn Notebook at 30. It marks the anniversary of the iconic Lincoln sculpture, along with Americans Abroad and Hyphen America, Intersections of Identity, which explores layered ideas of Americanness, if that's a word, and are presented in 4 languages. I've got with me here in the studio Aaron Hannes, Curator for Academic and Campus Engagement, and Christian Wurst, Associate Curator for Exhibitions, here to tell us more. Good morning to both of you.
Morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
With these exhibitions, there seems to be an ongoing theme of identity, especially national identity language. How do they each touch on that in different ways?
Yeah. So our main exhibition this spring is Hyphen American, Intersections of Identity. And the exhibition explores how artists have attempted to portray the American experience as we celebrate the country's 250th anniversary. how can we define Americanness when there is no monolithic American identity? And then the second show, Americans Abroad, takes the idea of artists being influenced by their travels outside of the United States and how they bring it back into their work.
How do you think in Americans Abroad, how does historical travel compare to the way artists experience the world today?
I think when artists traveled abroad, say 100 years ago, 60 years ago, they stayed for a very long time because they traveled by ship, they set up apartments, they wanted to enmesh themselves in those communities and be influenced by an art world that was unfamiliar to them.
Yeah. It is amazing to read how long people stayed someplace when they traveled compared to now. That just hardly ever happens. Do many people, you think, thinking of the Torn Notebook, do people drive past in Lincoln every day? And if they do drive past, how do you hope that they see it and maybe how they'll see it differently after getting some background in this particular exhibition?
Yeah, so the exhibition was curated by students who are members of our Sheldon Student Advisory Board. So this interdisciplinary group, and they were really interested in the artist process. How did the artists come up with this idea, first of all, for a sculpture in the form of this monumental torn notebook? And you check out the exhibition, you'll see sketches of a few other ideas, observations the artists made of Lincoln, of the state of Nebraska, and sort of how this sculpture came to be. I think it's really fun to think about this sculpture where it's located at 12th and Q Streets, being at this intersection between where the university campus begins, city campus begins, and where the larger city of Lincoln begins. It's really this intersection. It talks about different things you might see in the city that the artists notice, and hopefully people will stop, take a look at the sculpture, read some of the artists' observations and think about, well, what are the things that they themselves notice, either about Lincoln or if they are traveling to a different city, to a different place, what are the different observations that really stand out to them.
I love that the process is in there too, because often, especially if you're, looking at art for pleasure and you're not like a deep studier of art, you see the results and it doesn't necessarily occur that there might have been completely different ideas, just totally disparate from what you're looking at, that occurred at some point in that process. So that's really cool. Now, I know we're just doing a survey of all these things really quick. We will deep dive with you guys more as the months go on here. Hyphen America's exhibition and accompanying publication is going to be presented in 4 languages. I wanted to touch on that. Tell us about those languages and why those 4 were important for this project.
Yeah, absolutely. When we started to work on this exhibition, we knew it was very important to not just partner with local institutions, local cultural institutions here in Lincoln, but also present the exhibition in a way that's most accessible. So the 4 languages we chose are English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Arabic, which are the 4 most commonly spoken languages here. And so we partnered with the Asian Community and Cultural Center to translate the exhibition and the catalog into Arabic and Vietnamese. And we also partnered with UNL's translation services for the Spanish.
Okay, and we will definitely learn more as time goes on. I wish we could talk for longer this morning, you guys. Sheldon curators Aaron Hannes and Christian Wurst had 3 new exhibitions to tell us about this morning, from sketch to sculpture, Torn Notebook at 30, Americans Abroad, and Hyphen America, Intersections of Identity. Tomorrow, those all open, and they're up through July 6th at the Sheldon Museum of Art in Lincoln. The museum is open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 5, Sunday, noon to 5, and more details, as always, are on the Friday Live page. We'll give you that website in a moment. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
That website is nebraskapublicmedia.org. Be sure to visit that for podcasts of our show. Also coming up this morning on Nebraska Public Media, we've got Nebraska Concerts hosted by Laura Black, And this afternoon, Penelope Morrow will celebrate the weekend and bring you classics by request. Be sure to visit our website also for more details and links to everything that you've heard about this morning. Portions of Friday Live are pre-recorded, and Friday Live is not possible without the collaboration of Brendan Rook, Phoenix Carroll, Cole McEwen, KJ Tedder, KVNO's Gabrielle Escalera, and associate producer Arthur Jones. I'm Genevieve Randall.